Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Great Divorce Podcast. I'm very happy to have with me today Amy Ginsburg. Amy Ginsburg is a career and retirement coach. She's certified through the International Coaching Federation and has her own practice, Amy Ginsburg Coaching and Consulting, and also trains new coaches. Amy herself has transitioned between various careers in the arts, education, and nonprofits. When Amy realized that what she loved most about all these jobs was coaching from the sidelines, she trained up to be a life coach. It wasn't long before Amy realized that her favorite clients were those grappling with retirement issues. Amy also happens to have experienced gray divorce, as I expect have many of her clients. So I look forward to hearing her thoughts about retirement and career change as it applies to mid and late life divorcees. I know my thoughts about work and retirement shifted immensely after my divorce. So Amy Ginsburg joins us from her home in the Great Northwest, Olympia, Washington. Amy, hello. How are you today?
I am great, Andrew. Thank you for welcoming me to your podcast.
My pleasure, Amy. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. We've chatted a little bit in the past, and I think our challenge today will be to keep the conversation at a reasonable length. There's so many things to talk about in this area. I guess what I want to start with is the concept or the work of coaching. It's become such a popular vocation for many people, and I'm curious how you define the coaching work that you do, and maybe you can demystify it a little bit for our audience, and how would it relate to something like therapy or consulting?
Yes, I appreciate that question. It is often a very misunderstood field. It's a relatively new field, and as you've already mentioned, it's a growing and very popular profession. The distinction between therapy and coaching is an important one, and it's one that almost every one of my clients has when we first start talking. So typically, coaches, and there's a range in terms of how people would define it, but the basic definition of a coach is that they're partnering with somebody to create whatever they're wanting to create in their future. So it's a very future-focused profession. Therapy, while you may very well be talking about the future with your therapist, it tends to be more focused on one's past and on healing some kind of, healing is a big part of the modality, and restoring function, relieving pain in some cases. And of course, it's not to say that in a coaching session, one never talks about the past, or, certainly healing happens. And similarly, in therapy sessions, people will talk about future goals, but the focus and the role of a coach and a therapist is very different. And I would also emphasize that along those lines of roles, a therapist comes to the session as an expert. They are trained to diagnose medical cases and other diagnoses. A coach comes to the session as a partner with the client, with the view that the client is the expert in their own life. So that's a really big distinction between coaching and therapy.
I'm thinking where maybe you complement the work of the therapist is this future orientation towards the specific goals, perhaps, because we introduced you as a retirement and coaching coach. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about how you came to that particular specialty, and how do people come to you, and what are typical concerns that some of your clients might bring to you? And of course, there's so many ways we could go with this, and how do you work with them?
Yeah. So I started out as more of a generalist, as a life coach. And about a year into my practice, I looked back and it was really clear to me that the clients that I most enjoyed working with were my retirees. And when I define retiree as those that were contemplating retirement or fully invested and in later stages even of retirement. And so that's how I selected retirement coaching as a niche. I do define myself as a career and retirement coach because some of my clients are not yet retired, but that's how I selected this niche. And it's really exciting to think of the range of the people that I work with. The one thing that I share with folks is that the only thing I can guarantee is that what they intend or think that we will be talking about, we don't end up talking about.
That's interesting.
Really the
That's
only
interesting.
commonality. Yeah.
What
So
do they, I'm going to interrupt you here. What do they think you're going to be talking about?
well, people for good reason are like, oh gosh, how am I going to fill my days if I'm not working at my job? And a lot of things that are what I would consider on the doing level. And many of us sort of spend our time thinking about, gosh, my calendar is going to be so different. How am I going to do those new things? How am I going to spend my time, if you will? And what we very quickly end up talking about with the style of coaching that I practice is really what's the motivation underneath, like, well, what is it that you really, want to achieve in this next chapter of your life? What is your purpose that you see for yourself? And has that shifted now that you're no longer in the workforce? And so looking at some of the blocks that people have about creating things that they may have always wanted to create in their lives, or sorting out even fears that they may not have even known existed, or goals that they didn't know were there. So it gets to a much deeper place pretty quickly.
Now, are your clients mainly men or women, or a mixture?
It's a pretty decent mix, I would say. In my case, it's a mix of men and women, and I also work with couples. And so that's actually something that I personally will be exploring more in the future. I work with a few sets of clients who I work with together as a couple, and then I also work with them separately. So it's kind of a organic, like, when are we going to meet together and when are we going to meet separately? And you asked earlier about some examples, so I can give you some concrete examples. That's oftentimes helpful.
Yeah,
So
by
for
all means.
example, yeah, so a couple that I work with later in their retirement, well into their 70s, looking to simplify. Some people classify the retirement stages as like go, slow go, no go. And so I would say that this couple came to me when they were starting to shift into that slower go phase and really wanted to simplify some of the work, quite frankly, that they established for themselves, and they worked together in a business, like a later stage part-time thing. So I helped them to simplify that so that they could be doing more traveling and some other things that they wanted to do. And it very quickly turned into working with each of them on some personal growth areas. And we do still work on simplifying their business. And sometimes we'll come together, but it is not the focus of our time is no longer on the simplification of their business, which was what they originally had, hired me to help them with.
Now, when you say go, slow go, no go, I assume this is based on age.
Typically, yes. One of my other clients who is in her early 80s, she's an example of somebody who's choosing to simplify, and I would say sort of selecting to go into that slower go phase, and her body is not requiring it. She could be going. She's got more energy than many of my friends in their 50s. And it's more of a mental shift for her, which is kind of taking her by surprise. And actually, I'm pretty certain that that's why she reached out to reach with me as a coach. To work with me as a coach, is that she was like, well, why am I no longer desiring this go-go lifestyle. So it's a mix, but usually I would say that people's bodies do begin to slow down, and they prefer, and sometimes need to reevaluate what's realistic in that stage of their lives. Retirement.
There's so many areas we could go here. First of all, I'm thinking of a couple of things. You mentioned one of the assumptions that people have when they enter into a conversation with you about retirement is, what are they going to do? And kind of standard thought of retirement is you retire, from work to some sort of leisure, and it may be, a lot more golf or a lot more tennis or a lot more laying on the beach. And I think people, and maybe you could confirm this with your clients, is people are finding out that maybe golf or tennis or beach was a novelty while they were working, but it's no way to spend a full time or a lot of time in retirement. And that's kind of caused them to, rethink how they want to spend their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond.
Absolutely. And I know you and I have shared some research around, oftentimes people will imagine that they're just going to play golf, and, a few years into it, they say, this is actually not, it's not making me happy. It's actually my health is declining.
Yes.
And the research shows that people's life expectancy statistically decreases with, I think it was for every 1 year earlier that people retire, there's 2 months taken off of their life expectancy. And it's important to define retirement as it's not necessarily, I'm staying at my 50-hour a week job, but just the idea of like not having something that is meaningful in one's life, contributing to a greater project or volunteer work or part-time work. So when all of that stuff is eliminated, people's health does statistically tend to decline.
Yes. And, when you talked about energy, I think, a lot of energy can be derived from having a purpose, having something to do. And this is kind of where I see the link between coaching and therapy and, even medical doctors coming into play. If people aren't able to create a meaningful life for them, in the second and third acts, because you can either have a virtuous cycle or what's the word, a vicious cycle. If you are working very hard and had a go-go job and it cuts cold turkey, that can have implications for your sense of purpose, your interaction with others or lack of interaction, and that can kind of feed down a low energy, unhealthy circle versus having some meaning or purpose, and which can be energizing and contribute to a virtual cycle.
I agree 100%. And, so often, to be honest, I think it's really true also for people who are working crazy hours, earlier in their lives, that oftentimes people don't pause to really reflect on, what is my life purpose? Like, how do I want to be contributing? And it's a real gift to take a pause at any age and any stage in your life and to really define that. And so if somebody is entering retirement and hasn't yet paused to really look at that, it's certainly, I couldn't agree with you more that not having that sense of value certainly diminishes people's energies and so forth. I think the most striking example is I do have a client in his 30s who's retired, and it is very clear that sort of being taken out of the workforce early, all for good reason, all good in terms of finances and that kind of thing, but without that sense of purpose, being so young, not having had those life experiences, valuing himself and so forth, it's really, really clear that one needs to have that sense of value and purpose to thrive.
It's funny you should say that, because just a few days ago, I had a conversation with a client of mine who's in her 50s and retiring from a public service position. So she's retiring with a nice pension, but she's had colleagues who put in their hours very early in life and are retiring in their mid 40s with a very nice pension. And she said exactly what you just said. And it makes me wonder if maybe it might be a even more difficult transition for someone in their 40s because they don't have that kind of built, for lack of a better word, life experience or wisdom to deal with what's a shock to the system essentially. And I think, who was it? Was it Jonathan Rosh? I can't remember who wrote the book called The Happiness Curve, but he suggests that a really troublesome period for people is in their mid to late 40s. In terms of overall happiness, apparently studies have been done showing that is a difficult period. And if it's combined with a sense of being adrift with respect to finding meaning through your occupation, that could be a very difficult period.
Yeah. And I think specifically for women, I can speak for myself. So many of us have put a lot of our energies toward raising our kids.
Right.
And it's certainly true for men as well, certainly as gender roles are shifting. And so it overlaps with, when many kids are leaving the home, and regardless of people's work and retirement status, just that shift in purpose. It's a common time when it's like, wow, all my extra time has gone into raising these children and now they've flown the nest. And now what do I do? It's a super, super common thing. So then if layered on top of that, you're also either shifting careers or potentially retiring, that can really leave a gap for people.
So, discussing, women, for instance, women in gray divorce who may have spent may have given up a career at a relatively young age and brought up children for 20 or so years, maybe longer these days. Must be quite difficult to this question of what to do. And this applies also to men who would perhaps want a career change. And this goes back to a point that you raised earlier about deciding what to do. But there's a lot of questions there. And it's difficult because it all kind of revolves around understanding yourself and your mindset and your awareness. And in society these days, there's the common phrase, follow your bliss or follow your passion, which is easy to say, but a lot of people have no idea what their bliss or their passion is. Can you give me an example? I mean, or how would you approach working with somebody who, and you must come across this, they're not sure exactly what it is that they should do?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it is super common. And one of the first things I certainly would do is to normalize it. And I know you and I have talked about the Designing Your Life curriculum. It's out of
Right.
Stanford University, Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. I want to make sure to give them credit for that. And one of the things that they cite in their book is, and in the course that they offer at Stanford, is that 80% of us don't have a quote unquote passion.
Right.
And this real myth, and I even found myself asking my young kids, like, as they're talking about, what they want to do when they grow up, so to speak. It's so often for us, even at that young age, to encourage kids to follow their passion. And, statistically, 80% of us don't really know what that is. And it's the passion is going to follow from the experience. And so to normalize, you're not alone, and that you don't have this golden star showing you exactly where to lead you on the path of your passion, so to speak. So that's one piece. I also love an adage that I picked up from the Designing Your Life curriculum, is this whole concept of deciding things just for now.
Right.
That so often we become overwhelmed with a decision when we feel like it needs to be a forever decision. Somebody's retired and, what am I going to pursue? Or often with my clients who are switching jobs, what should I choose? I mean, it's true for myself. When I chose to shift to coaching, initially it felt like, oh gosh, I'm nearly 50, I'm switching jobs, I better get it right, so to speak. and to really just lighten that load, and that this is a decision for now, and that you can decide something else in the near future or far future. So those are some things that I do explore.
I think there's a parallel that I love this concept of deciding for now, and the idea of taking small actions, because it works on so many different levels. First of all, taking action on something inevitably sets some sort of positive momentum going forward. You're accomplishing things. But I think there's a parallel to creativity as well, in that we I don't think the best ideas are plucked out of the air. I think they come from the process of doing. And maybe we don't know exactly what we want to do for the next 10 years, but if we start on something that intrigues us, maybe that'll lead us to something that we're really passionate about. And there's nothing wrong if our minds change over time as well. I mean, things we care about certainly change over time. So I think sometimes some of the personal development industry can lead us down the wrong path sometimes. I think ultimately it comes from our own doing, our own experience, and what we value and find purpose in.
I fully agree. You asked earlier, or you at least mentioned the term mindset, and I feel like it's important to sort of add into the conversation here that, this idea of putting so much emphasis on what we're doing is also something that is often reflected in the coaching session. And this idea that the way one shows up for one thing is the way one shows up for anything.
Right.
So for example, if I show up for my coaching session and, well, even just something silly, not so silly, but just benign in the sense that I'm consistently late. Let's say I'm consistently late to my coaching session, that way of showing up is inevitably going to be the way that I show up everywhere, with my life partner, with my children, with my friends. And so digging into, well, what is it about me that is having me show up in this way for my coaching session? And what inevitably happens is that it's a portal of self-awareness. And in this example, being late, it's just something small. It could be around self-confidence. It could be around having difficulty making decisions. It could be around self-worth. It's an infinite number of things that can be observed of how we show up. And then once we have that self-awareness, we can then choose, do I want to show up this way in all of these different areas of my life where I now see that I consistently do this, that I have this pattern? And to me, that's really the power of coaching. And that's really what I mean when I say that we don't talk about what people think we're going to talk about. Because we'll sort out, I'm going to become a painter or something, but it's really how I show up as a painter that is what's so transformative.
Right. And I think, unfortunately, I don't have the studies in front of me, but they've come across my desk a lot of these studies that have shown that the attitude that we bring to an endeavor is just crucial in how the endeavor proceeds. And simple dichotomy of optimism versus pessimism. I think if you think something's going to fail, well, there's a good chance it might. But if you're open, and there's so many different ways the mindsets, you can work on your mindset. I think of just taking a deep breath can perhaps be a mindset tool, like waiting an extra 10 seconds before you speak. Not losing your temper in traffic. I guess you hear meditation is often, and breathing exercises are often mindset exercises.
Yeah. And I also feel like the term mindset, it's perhaps sometimes used in different ways. What I'm hearing in your question is like, being fully present, and how can I be fully present in my life as a way of being mindful. And what you mentioned earlier about having a positive outlook, like this is going to go a certain way for me, is going to create that outcome, is kind of a different flavor of mindset. And all of those things do show up in coaching sessions for sure.
You know, would you say mindset relates to the concept of getting outside of one's comfort zone? Because I've become a big proponent of the idea that any little thing you can do to get outside your comfort zone will just take you to wonderful places.
Oh, yeah. Well, I believe strongly in that. And the training program that I trained up with, there's a quote in one of the tools, and it says, it's my favorite quote of, in the unknown is where possibility lives. And
Right.
so we all have this comfort zone, and it's cool. Like, we can stay in here and life will be good. But out in the unknown is where the possibility exists. And so getting out of our comfort zone, in other words, is where,
That's
other things happen.
a much more elegant turn of phrase than nothing great was achieved inside your comfort zone, which is one I tend to use frequently. This is great stuff, and we could talk about this and for a long time. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think that our listeners might benefit from?
Well, an area of study that I'm heading in personally, in terms of my own professional growth, in terms of mindset, is this idea of the mind-body connection, and our ability to create our future through our mindset. And I'm personally going to be exploring more about the potential for healing, both emotional healing as well as physical healing, through that mind-body connection. And I see examples around me all the time. So that's a whole other facet of mindset.
Well, does this relate to stress at all? Because we've heard that stress is the silent killer, and we may have known people who've stressed themselves into an early grave. It would seem to me that the right mindset could be a great alleviator of stress.
Oh, 100%. And, again, I want to be cautious. I do understand that some things are bigger than our minds, abilities, and absolutely 100%. I am a strong believer that our mindset truly creates our world. I think it was the Buddha who said, with our thoughts, we make our world. And I can only imagine how many others have restated that concept over and over again. Our outlook creates our reality fully. And any coach, one of the things that I would you asked other things to include before we close. If people are looking for a coach, coaching is an unregulated industry at this point.
Right.
And so one does not need a license in one's state to practice coaching the way that a therapist does. And so one way to filter through is to find somebody who is accredited with the International Coaching Federation, because it is the only accrediting body. It is an international accrediting association. And, any coach that's trained up, certainly through the ICF, this idea that we are creating our future through our mindset, through the way that we are looking at the world, is a commonality of the coaching profession for sure. It's a big part of how clients and coaches partner together to create their futures.
How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, I have a website, amyginsburgcoaching.com, and that's spelled AMYGINSBURG coaching.com. And on that website, there's an explanation of my practice as well as a contact form. So that's a great way to reach out to me. And I'm also on LinkedIn. with that same, you could find me with that same name, Ginsburg.
Terrific. Well, look, thank you very much, Amy. We're going to have you back on the show to discuss all the other notes I've got that we didn't touch on. But really appreciate your thoughts, and thank you very much for being with us here today.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you and your podcast and introducing me to this concept of gray divorce. I had no idea that I was a gray divorcee until you and I met. So thank you for that additional identifier.
Gray divorce, it could be a great thing. Well, the results, the post divorce can be a great thing.
100%, yes.
Yeah,
So
and that's maybe we'll talk about, maybe we'll table a discussion on post-traumatic growth for another day.
Well, you already know my concept of that term, post-traumatic, so it's
right.
We can rename it.
we don't have to necessarily agree on every detail.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.